Thank you both for being here. So good to sort of have this discussion right now at a really interesting time in the economy and the markets. I want to dive right in. Many executives obviously are bracing for a potential economic slowdown. Hans, I want to start with you. How is that changing where you invest, where you decide to place your bets?
All right. We have a global practice. So we invest in the US, Asia, Latin America, different parts of the world. We also have thriving practices in different areas, consumer, enterprise, and smart tech. And within smart tech, we are increasingly look at food as one of the category to invest. And one reason that that's the case is because when we have made a lot of money on consumer internet investing and also enterprise investing, just looking at what's happening around the world, some of the topics that the previous panelists have mentioned with climate change and so forth, food tech is becoming to be increasingly critical and important in the future. So it's an area we still invest in regardless of the macro, because we know this is a much longer term problem.
Are the types of food companies you're investing in changing though? Are you looking, does sort of what's ahead for the economy change sort of what you decide to prioritize?
Sure. The areas we have been looking at, one bucket, if you look at the number of investments, amount of investment in put to food tech in 2021, ends up being about 39 billion. And the biggest one is on food delivery. Next category is online grocery. And the one after that is alternative proteins that Irving mentioned as an area that he's very passionate about. And then follow up beyond that is the vertical farming and others. So those are still the areas that are attracting funding, but obviously with the current environment, some of the valuations are becoming more depressed and more like last round or even down round instead of major up rounds that we've seen over the last 5-6 years. And that's fair, but that's part of going through rationalizing some of the excess, but the longer term problem remains. I still remember 10 years ago, a lot of people having doubts about EV, too expensive, and the car manufacturer have no incentive to really make that work. And then with Elon and the team at Tesla, really changed a lot of that. Today, you can argue that some of the car manufacturers make better cars than Tesla, but without Tesla, that wouldn't have happened. And so we start looking for disruptors that can set and change the way these industries are going to be run and competing in the future. And when that happens, it makes us happy. We make money at the same time. You're doing social good and making a huge impact on how people live and how this planet is going to function going forward.
So thinking about disruptors, John, Tyson, one of the biggest food companies in this space. How do you look at the investments that you're making? Are you looking to find those would-be disruptors and partner with them? Are you looking to bet on technology now that you might eventually bring in-house later? Like, how do you sort of think about this from Tyson?
So I think there's a couple ways that we think about the investments that we're looking at. And first, you think about the business environment that we're in, and what that means in terms of investments in our core business, productivity, raw materials, how we think about various supply issues that we're going to have as it relates to either global conflict, climate change, you name it. And then I think if you connect that to our venture practice and as part of the corporate or part of the venture ecosystem, the role we play as a corporate is different than GGV, for example. And I think if you think about the market that we're in today, I'll give you an example of something that 3 or 4 months ago, maybe a little bit before that, I was talking with one of the guys I work with that we were trying to make some investments, and we said, hey, we're a corporate in this really frothy market. Our process is too slow. We need to figure out how to be faster, how we can get in these deals, because we're missing on some otherwise like good things that we want to be a part of. Whereas now I think what we've seen in a world where there's a little more timidity, and there's a type of deal that we really love where we can strike a commercial relationship with a company, have some type of agreement for whatever it is they're selling or making, their software. We can help them innovate and iterate early in their life cycle. We actually become a good partner for those types of companies who need some anchor enterprise, scale tenants. So I think how has it influenced how we think? I think we've just tried to figure out where can we actually bring the most value to who we're working with. And so market dynamics definitely influence that.
So I'm sure both of you are being pitched all day long by different companies. John, how do you decide what's real, what's worth actually investing in, and what's not? I mean, are there certain sectors right now that you just won't touch?
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer. I think we look at different time horizons for the investments that we're making. In some instances, I would say we want to find a company that solves a specific problem. We'll go into kind of the market of businesses out there and say, hey, let's go find XYZ robotic solution that picks and places soft goods on a manufacturing line. Who's the best one? And And then I think that in other instances, we're making investments where it's kind of long-term, it's not necessarily commercial, and in either case, like there's been benefits. I think sometimes I have to resist the temptation to say, hey, how can we get stuff that's going to bring value now, more thinking about the future. And the examples I can give you there are, I think it was 2015 or 16 is when we first invested with Beyond Meat. We've made some investments in some cell-based agriculture companies that I think, had we been thinking about this needs to be commercial in a few years' time, we wouldn't be there. And I think as a result of that longer-term investment horizon, we now feel like we've started to become a part of the ecosystem in a way that is supportive, again constructive to the startups that we're working with, and kind of gives us a different position than somebody trying to come in at this point in the life cycle of the industry. Excuse me.
And Hans, I wonder, sort of on his point, are the questions that you're asking investors right now different than they may have been 3 or 4 months ago? I mean, are you starting to sort of ask them about their companies, ask them different things than you would have before?
We've been doing this for almost 20 years now, so we navigate through different cycles. And the overarching question that we discuss internally is this: are we is this more like 2008, 2000, or God forbid, 1980? And so depending
What's your answer on that?
somewhere between. Obviously, everybody has a different opinion. Personally, it's like 2000 took 3 years to recover. 1980 took 5-6 years. So it hopefully is somewhere in between, closer to 2000. We'll see, and no one knows for sure. But for us, when I talk to founders, it's a lot more about unit economics today and how they're figuring out a path to cash flow break even. But at the same time, we're still mindful they're solving problems take a long time to get it right. And they're solving problems, and when they get it right, can be enormously beneficial to many stakeholders. So you balance the need for short-term kind of viability. You also think in long-term, is this a team that can really go far? And this is why we continue taking Barry's example, investing every single round since we called that a Series A, is because we know that this is a big problem, someone's going to solve it, and we think that was the best team after we scan everybody in the field. And the video mentioned earlier, just before this panel, the food wastage. During COVID, one of the stats we saw was like 80 million pounds of foods wasted, 80 billion pounds of food wasted by grocery stores every year. On a daily basis, 3.7 million gallons of milk is thrown away. So despite the food shortage problem, just the whole system is not as efficient, and you end up wasting a lot of food because you cannot get to the right place at the right time. So the need for localization is very strong. So those are kind of areas we spend time thinking. We're an investment company called Shelf Engine that works with grocers, leveraging machine learning and superior algorithm to make predictive work better for them, to be able to know when to stock up and so forth. These are things that we saw in enterprise world, in consumer internet world, that worked really well. And now those technologies and know-how are being spread over to traditional industries. And those are the kind of things we want to look for. Are the founders capable of understanding the problem in their own sector from a traditional way of doing things and the things wrong with them, but at the same time, leverage technology that's proven developed elsewhere to take that to help to disrupt the sector they're in.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder how you both think about, though, we've seen a number of sort of the most prominent companies in the space, Beyond Meat, Oatly, that have struggled since their IPOs. I mean, does that color when you think about those disappointments, does that color sort of what you would want to invest in next? I mean, John, I wonder how you think about that.
So I think, look, I think that where we are in the market today, in some ways, we shouldn't have been totally surprised when we understood the amount of attention, excitement in these categories in the food sector and the CPG sector. And so when you have this level of competition, I think there's ultimately will be a shakeout that happens. And I think this is how we think about using our position and some of the other first movers in the space. We kind of wait and see what's going to happen with a lot of competition. I think for us though, we tend to think about on the branded side of things or more on the product side of things. We don't do a lot of real venture investing as much in kind of startup brands. I think for us, Beyond Meat is a very widely respected brand, but it was much about the technology and the category at the time. And so as we kind of think about what's going to go on in the marketplace, we kind of see it as like an opportunity for competition. And one thing that we always want to bring to bear, and when we want to work with a startup that we're investing in, how can we leverage our scale to help them scale? Because ultimately we know that it's going to be the capabilities around taste, convenience, productivity that is what's ultimately going to enable these businesses to win over the long term. And so if you have a little bit of disruption and noise in the market, like we've been a public company for a long time, so like people are all stressed about stock prices going up and down, like we've been through it. And so these kinds of things happen when people enter the public markets.
Does it feel like an opportunity? I mean, Tyson is a company that has acquired a lot of companies over the years. Do you feel like now is the moment where you could go shopping for some of these companies? I mean, do you feel like your willingness to acquire more companies, does it look?
Well, what I can say is, and we talk about this with our investor base, which is, we have certain growth targets that we want to meet in order to kind of meet the shareholder return expectations that we set for ourselves. And we build our operating plans around that. And there's a balance of returning capital to shareholders. Some of it will be investing in our business, and some of it will be M&A. And so, is there opportunity out there? I think that's always the case. But we've been an acquisitive business since our history. I would tell you that probably 2 or 3 of the most transformative points in time in the history were when we bought a company, entered into a category that we were not at that point in time competing in at scale. And it has kind of created the DNA of who Tyson is in its current form.
So M&A activity, think we'll see more of it over the next year, less? What do you think about it from Tyson's end?
So we saw some data the other day that, and I think it was from McKinsey, and they came out with a report, and it said companies that are willing to invest in more turbulent down markets tend to see incrementally better returns.
Yes.
And so I think that is something that factors into our head. I think as a VC investor doing it for multiple decades, sometimes a leading indicator of your returns is going to be, what's the vintage? And it's a matter of how do you win in that vintage, not necessarily how do you a 2014 fund beat a 2018 fund, but how you winning at the relative time. So, Tyson's an acquisitive company, has been historically, and I think will continue to be so.
So Hans, I want to talk to you about just, given your work with a lot of entrepreneurs over the years, what are the biggest challenges? We're in a room with a lot of startup founders here, a lot of people who are kind of trying to guide their companies to these next phases. What are the toughest challenges right now for entrepreneurs that you work with in sort of this turbulent environment?
Yeah, every time when there's a downturn, there's both risks that you have to manage and also opportunities. Obviously, the biggest risk is cash flow. Can you get funding that will give you 18, 24 months of runway to allow you to do things you need to do to show a path to very positive unit economics and cash flow break even? The opportunities are, there are other people who are struggling even more than you. And so you can actually hire people and do things at a much cheaper rate than before and get talent that you probably wouldn't have been able to do during the bull market with so much noise and other people competing for the same pool of talent. So it really depends on how you balance the opportunities. And I still remember, it was only in 2002, 2003, nobody wanted to meet with Jeff Bezos. And, e-commerce, 2 years after the bubble bursted, they can compete against the Walmart of the world. And even that question still persisted, 2014, 15, 16. Yeah, Amazon's doing well, but Walmart has a bigger offline presence. I'm not picking on Walmart per se, but in general, just that it's easy to, at any given moment, to have a lot of doubts and things. But when there are challenges, there's also a great opportunity to make a difference. I'm investing in Airbnb, and during COVID, in the first 3 months, it seemed like things are really bleak for the travel industry, for example. And we got on stage and speak on behalf of Airbnb and figured out, hey, if Airbnb can figure out how to make staycation work, they have more inventory and a more flexible supply chain than anyone else in the business. They can do well. So it really encouraging founders to be creative. Of course, final thought, it's easy to be a venture capitalist on this side of the table and say, hey, do more and be creative and manage your risk. I was a founder once. I know how hard that is. And so we definitely appreciate our portfolio founders who can make things happen during tough times.
Yeah.
I wanted to add something too. I think the other thing we start to see in this kind of market environment is almost a little bit of validation for remaining as an investor disciplined through some of these cycles. I mean, I can tell you there are points in time the last couple of years where we're just like, really, are we gonna miss on this one again? Because we have certain return thresholds. These are what our investors expect, and it's just you kind of feel like you're on the sidelines for a while. But I think now, having had the patience and the discipline, hopefully we'll get more active. Again, still working within the kind of confines of what our acceptable returns are that we set for ourselves.
So Hans, you mentioned Amazon, the example where people didn't want to meet with Jeff Bezos, and now everybody, the room laughed at that now. What's the parallel for the food world, where people are sort of laughing at a concept, laughing at something now, feeling like it, and that you feel like years later will be something that will be proved out?
Right. Again, 10 years ago, for EV cars, people think it's just too expensive. The cost will never come down. It's very hard to come down. And today, a lot of food tech companies, including indoor farming, people feel that the cost is high. And how can it come down and compete? I think the panel before us argued very articulately why you shouldn't think short term, but think long term. So these are the things that we do think about and balance it out when we make investments. Ultimately, it's the amazing founders who make things work, make the impossible happen. And so we're mindful that no matter how sometimes we look at a business model and it doesn't make sense, and we need to take into account of that. At the same time, they only be a few founders in each category that can make a huge difference, and you can't miss those.
Well, we've got a little more time before we get to audience questions. John, I want to talk to you, though. You're a fourth-generation member of the Tyson founding family. How do you think about just your own role changing inside the company as you look at your career ahead?
I think it's a question I think about from time to time. I think first off, what's nice about working in a business that we're public, but we have dual class share structure, which allows us to take some longer term views. And I think that when we look around and think about some of our competition, and we're investing for 10 years and for 20 years, it allows us to do things that maybe a different leader would not do. So I think that's a good position to be in. And I think how do things evolve? I mean, again, all coming back to the position that you're trying to create a business that my great grandpa started Tyson, call it 87 or 88 years ago, and so how do you have a business that lasts another 87 or 88 years? And a lot of what we're talking about today as it relates to climate, the environment, nature. We haven't talked a lot about nature. We've talked a lot about water and climate, but like nature as an element of the agriculture system. These are things that we have to think about. And I guess maybe one way to kind of bring that into the conversation is I met somebody a few weeks ago, and they were like, it's really interesting that you work in sustainability, not because you're a tree hugger, but because you think it's good for business. And I was like, no one's ever said that to me before, but that is kind of how I think about it.
Interesting. Well, I wanted just to add one more of that. You mentioned all those factors. Labor is another one, too. It's been a big theme of this conference so far, just the challenge in getting workers right now.
Yeah.
How does Tyson look at that in terms of places you might invest? I mean, are you on the market for more startups that might have automation technology that'd be helpful in some of your plants? How do you think about this?
No, for sure. Someone said earlier that the job of today, they were telling their son or their daughter, the job of today is different than the job you have in 10 years. And I think that's how we think about our workforce as well. We are kind of simultaneously investing in a couple of things. One is how do we do things, higher levels of productivity, more efficiently, more safety. And at the same time, then if that means we have a workforce that's got to do different jobs, how do we invest in their own, thriving careers? And I just give a few examples of how we do that. One, we've got some pretty compelling childcare pilots that I think are really not matched in our industry in terms of different models, times of day, like how we work with the government or directly with the local community or the parents. We announced a month or two ago. We have professional training, certificates, English language classes, associates, bachelor's, master's degrees for all of our employees, 100% free. And so this is the kind of thing people come to work at Tyson because they see a company that's investing in a way that's aligned with its values and wanting people to feel like they can be part of a company and a family for a long time. And so it's not just looking for new and novel technology, but it's also about the culture of self-reliance and people being able to grow and evolve in their careers that we also try to foster intentionally too.
Great. So one forward-looking question before we go to the audience. What crystal ball moment from each of you, what's one, if you think about sort of the next 12 months and what you think we're going to see among food companies, particularly sort of younger food companies trying to disrupt what's happening here, what's one sort of specific prediction you think we might see in the next year, what might happen to this group? Hans, do you have any thoughts?
There will be some M&As for sure. It will be some consolidations.
Some companies won't survive?
Some companies definitely will not survive. but the few that have promised that will do well will end up raising a lot more capital than people expect. And they will generate outsized return and also making a lot more impact than people thought it was possible. So it is exciting, even though it's challenging.
John?
You know, I think I would say something similar, but maybe I can apply it to what you see in kind of the larger, more mature company space is, if I'm an investor, you know, I'm looking to those businesses that I see are willing to invest through the cycle, kind of eat some pain, but put themselves in position to win in 2, 3, 5+ years from now. And you know, I don't know who it's going to be, but someone's going to make a boneheaded, short-term decision, and I just hope it's not us at Tyson.
All right, let's open it up to audience questions. Would love to hear from those in the room your questions for these two. Yeah, let's start over here on the side. And if you don't mind introducing yourself and your title and where you're from.
Certainly. Jamie Valenti-Jordan, CEO of Catapult Commercialization Services. So in the prediction of the, I call it a cascade of M&A that's going to happen in the food industry within sometime in the near future. You know, I kind of predicted it from the Kellogg and the Cliff recent elements. Is that actually those type of deals where they're driving up those acquisition prices? Is that going to drive more and more entrepreneurs to enter the space and drive that innovation cycle that we were talking with the secretary yesterday about?
Hans, do you want to take that, or?
I don't know if that we've done at the prices that'll make founders really happy, because the next 12 months will be harder than the last 12 months. But having more liquidity in this business definitely will be helpful. Now, some of the acquirers themselves, the online delivery, food delivery business, a lot of publicly traded companies, their stock prices have come down quite a bit. But if you talk to their heads of strategy or corp dev, they're still out there looking for things to happen. So I think that even for those who are selling now, they should pick the right acquirer, hold on to the acquirer stock, and weather through the next 2 years, because they will do very well 5, 6 years from now. So don't just pick because the price is attractive. You can get out and cash out, but think that you're solving a longer-term problem. So pick the best acquirer whose stock can be worth a lot more 5, 6, 7 years from now.
All right, more questions. Any on this side of the room? Okay, Sarah, what about any from the virtual audience too?
We actually do have a few questions from our virtual audience. I will take one from Dorian Dickinson. How are you identifying potential disruptors that normally would slip through the cracks? Maybe, John, you want to take that?
I'll answer that one. I mean, how do you identify something that's slipping through the cracks? Like, I mean, that is the problem right there. You know, I think we've tried to do something recently at Tyson that I can share about from a corporate venture capital standpoint, which is we used to have a model where we had a small centralized VC team, and we were the ones saying, hey, let's go find the technology, and then what we'll do is we'll use this whole company of subject matter experts, SMEs, to say, hey, like, is this good computer vision technology for an FSQA issue? Or, hey, like, does this actually solve a real health and safety problem? And we've tried to actually flip that model on its head and say, how can we source from 100,000+ people that work at Tyson? Let us evaluate the business, the other investors, kind of the strategy, and let's play a different role. And I'll tell you, we put out, this isn't anything totally original, but we're going to do in July kind of a startup demo day where we invite founders and companies to come in and talk to us. And I have to say, the amount of interest we got, not only from the startup community in a short time window of applications that we had, but also from employees at Tyson who we put out a call to say, hey, do you want to be a part of picking the startups that we go, and they'll come and be with our executives. So that's a way I think that we've tried to get things through the cracks, is kind of like put an open call, and things we might write off originally. You give somebody a chance to send you a pitch deck, and you're like, oh, maybe there's something here. So that's the hard part. And I think also just working with our network, you start to find great partners that you invest with, and they can be a great source of deals as well.
Hans, I'd love to hear your take on that, though. How are you making sure you don't have folks slip through the cracks?
I think-
Anything different that you're doing now?
I think we have the benefit of having doing this for a long time, so the network we have built, the best founders refer other great founders. So out of all the deals that we've done, we feel that the ones that generate outsized returns have been the ones that other founders recommend us to me because they know the people for a longer period of time in different tough situations, good situations, how they handle themselves, and those are the best way to judge whether someone has a chance to do something incredible. Because this, doing startup is so hard, and most people don't make it for the right reasons. And so when you find the people who can just do amazing things, they come from the people who know them best.
Well, Hans, John, terrific conversation. Thanks so much to you both. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.